Welcome everyone to today's information session, the PhD in Sustainability Science here at Brock University. We're delighted to have you join us. I'll start by giving you a brief outline of what we plan to talk about today. But first, I'd like to introduce some guests in the audience here. Amanda Smits is the Environmental Sustainability Research Center Administrator. She's here along with Erin Daly, the Center Coordinator, ESRC we call ourselves. And we also have a guest joining us from the Faculty of Graduate Studies, Lauren Perrick, who's the Manager of Graduate Education Engagement. So we're the administrative team here that's ready to answer any questions that you might have for us. So I'll start by giving you a brief introduction to the geographic location we're in here in the Niagara region, and then talk about the program, how we define sustainability science, because it's a discipline that's defined in many different ways. We'll talk about the program aim and objectives, the structure and some funding, and then your admissions requirements, and we'll go over a little checklist for you, and then some post-degree career opportunities, and then our contact info. And then, of course, we'll open the floor to our online audience. So first, a little bit about the Niagara region. It's the warmest, one of the warmest regions in Canada, which makes it really lovely space to be. Today, I believe it's 19 degrees Celsius outside and a little sunny, which is great. We're located just south of Toronto, Ontario. We're located right next to a major border, so the US is right beside us. And we're bound by water mostly, at least on three sides, with Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and the Niagara River on three sides of us. So this site is actually a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve. And biosphere reserves are really important to us because they're great locations for learning around sustainability science. And in fact, because of the unique environmental, social, and economic context here in the region, it makes it for a great place to study sustainability science and environmental sustainability challenges. So that's our location. We, the ESRC, are located at Teal House, which is an old building here from 1837. So it's right sort of beside the main campus, so it's very close by. And this slide, these slides will be shared with you, but this particular slide includes some links to information around living in Niagara, as well as off-campus housing, which we know is a really important issue to students coming from elsewhere or even here locally, right? So knowing a bit more about the region is really helpful. Before we get too into the details of the program, we want to tell you a little bit more about how we define sustainability science. It's a fairly new discipline. It's emerged since the 2000s, growing out of sustainable development and environmental studies, for example, where we take elements of natural science and the social sciences and bring those together for more effective problem solving. Typically, sustainability scientists come from a transdisciplinary perspective, which means that it considers multiple voices at the table from different academic disciplines to look at trying to solve real-world sustainability challenges. So faculty involved in our program and students involved in our program come from the sciences, the social sciences, humanities, applied health science, etc. So there are core faculty in the program that are from economics to politics to biology, earth science, education, and even the business school here that we have at Brock. So that's really wonderful because it means we can engage in different ways with different students around a multitude of interests related to sustainability science. Some fundamental features of the program is that, of course, we focus on socially relevant problems and use a solutions-oriented approach. And of course, we recognize that research on these really complicated environmental challenges requires input from different communities of knowledge. And of course, that's one of the reasons we take a transdisciplinary orientation in the program. And when we're thinking about those different knowledges, it's also the different ways we produce knowledge and share knowledge. So of course, Indigenous voices are also an important piece of that. So the aim, and this is a slide that contains a lot of text, but we move one step beyond the master's level side of the program, where here PhD students are really engaged in a different way in sort of rigorous scientific practice and understanding the connection between humans and the environment. So PhD students are in courses with our master's students, but they actually play a different role because you're at the PhD level where we see you as our peers, right? Working towards solving some of these challenges that we face. So ultimately, we're trying to help develop sustainability scientists who can then go out into the world and have learned a little bit about decision making and policy development and best practice both locally and globally. So we often bring our PhD students and master students into our community partnerships and have them engage with partners in different ways, depending on the research interests, as well as your interests in terms of professional development. This slide just gives you a bit of an example of some of the activities that our students are involved in, from typical classroom environment to being out in the field to collect data. The top two photos, the middle photos. We also have a lot of events that we host at Brock around sustainability. And we have a community garden that's located right beside our home at Tail House, which is really cool. So for those who have a green thumb, like Amanda, which is lovely, can also participate in the community garden. And then the bottom photos show you also engagement outside of the university. So here you're looking at a class that went to visit a local partner, the Vineland Research and Innovation Center, and they work quite closely with us on a number of projects. So that's really wonderful. And then lastly, of course, there's lots of conferences that happen that are either hosted here at Brock or in the local area that we encourage students to be involved in. So there's lots of opportunities for engagement with academics and community while in our program. In terms of faculty, we have about 10 core faculty that are prepared to or are available to supervise PhD students for fall 2023. And I just flagged for you that there's a link here that you can visit a site that shows you availability of supervisors. And I highly recommend that you look at that list and make sure that when you reach out to contact somebody that they have actually agreed that they're available. So they'll know their schedule for next year and whether they have availability or not. I also note that you'll find their primary research interests, and I would review those interests and make sure that there is alignment between your interests and the interests of a core faculty member. And then lastly, that to be aware that often when we're thinking about supervising a PhD student, we may speak to multiple students because we don't know which one may receive an offer of admission. So while someone may agree, we say in principle, to be your supervisor, that means there's agreement that your research interests are aligned and there's potential to work with that faculty member. It's not a guaranteed entry into the program, and it's not guaranteed that they can actually supervise your work. It'll be dependent on the number of students they take in and how many they have capacity to supervise. So just have an awareness of that just agreement alone does not mean that you will be getting access into the program or admitted into the program. I know you can read about these individuals online. These are just some of the people that are prepared to supervise PhD students, but it gives you an idea of, okay, you know, where are they coming from, so you can look people up online and see what their core interests are. But I can tell you that we have a CRC, Canada Research Chair, in water or water-related human dimensions of water, thinking about water quality, water quantity, resilience, and our capacity to access water.
Marilyn, can you just pause for 1 second? Sorry. We're just having a video issue. Oh, okay, go ahead. Sorry, they couldn't see it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I'm having trouble seeing it too, so just give me 1 second here.
No problem. Do you want me to just keep talking about the research interests?
Erin, can you? Yeah, you're back. Okay, sorry about that. Go
No worries, no worries.
I just know everyone's online, so I want to make sure that they can see and hear you.
Thanks for letting us know, by the way. Yeah, feel free to stop me anytime. Just speaking about some of the research interests, there's a lot of work around resilience, social ecological systems, climate change, to looking at the urban tree canopy, the importance of the canopy, thinking about ecosystem services or disservices. There's lots of work in looking at urban spaces, dealing with urban sprawl, again, climate change, so impacts of flooding, for example, on communities, or extreme weather events, all the way to drought, and studying, you know, the Canadian North and sea ice extent. So there's lots of different opportunities for projects in sustainability science. We have a recent faculty member who's joined us from the Goodman School of Business, who also has interest in looking at corporate social responsibility, for example, branding and marketing around sustainability science issues. So that's really exciting for us. They have recently recruited yet another faculty member who will be available to supervise PhD students. And you can, of course, reach out to these faculty and learn more about their research interests beyond what's available online. But there's lots of exciting work happening, so that's great news. Our PhD is the only one like it in Canada, and it's new. We started just last year. We brought in a couple students, so that's exciting as well. This slide's meant to give you an idea of the kind of progression through terms of the 4-year program and what you'll be doing each term. So there's a couple of courses that you would take initially, and then slowly you move into working on your comprehensive exam, and then your proposal for research, and then spending quite a bit of time working with a faculty member doing your research. I want to note that because this is a unique program, and because it's one of the only ones in Canada, we've taken a lot of time to think about how we define sustainability science and what that means, and what are the sort of foundations of sustainability science. And because students can come from slightly different backgrounds, if you haven't taken courses in the foundations of sustainability science or in the methods used by sustainability scientists, then we do have you take those 2 courses that are part of our master's program in your first couple of terms of study, usually the first term of study. So that you also have that background and context to work from. Okay, in terms of funding, and a lot of students are particularly interested in learning about funding, these are the funding numbers for this year, so just bear that in mind. They do typically change year to year. But we've got links here to funding information, and that'll take you directly to our Faculty of Grad Studies pages. And again, Lauren is here today and answer questions that you might have around that. Tuition is also of interest too, and other financial resources that are available to students, including awards and scholarships. So all of that information is very nicely laid out on those websites. There are actually a long list of awards and scholarships available to students. So, and again, it'll depend on whether you're a master's student, PhD, and then of course whether you're a domestic student or international, but there are opportunities for students that way. Typically when you are admitted to a program here at Brock, you would get a letter of admission from the Faculty of Grad Studies, and typically that letter would articulate some of your funding that you would receive. So two main pieces of funding are a fellowship and a grad assistantship. The fellowship is funds that's applied directly to your tuition. So we're looking at the PhD amounts here for domestic and international students. And then the grad assistantship in our program is either in the form of a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship. And the research assistantship is it's paid employment, and it's a position where you typically work with a supervisor, and Amanda, as center administrator, she's involved heavily in our projects and our partnerships, and you would work on a particular project with a partner. And so that's how you would get income in your first 2 terms of study. That assistantship would be available to you. Or it could be in the form of a teaching assistantship, where you would also spend 2 terms in paid employment that we would place you into those positions. That's for the first 2 terms only, but thereafter you can apply to be a teaching assistant, for example. I want to note that we also offer training for research assistantships. So Amanda Smith often sits with students who are coming into the program and provides some of that training. And then we have a Center for Pedagogical Innovation for teaching assistants, and you have a whole gamut of courses you can take to learn more about teaching, typically at the undergraduate level. And that's really great too, because that's part of your professional training as a PhD, so that's really great. I want to note that when you are looking at getting the grad assistantship portion of your funding, that means you must be eligible to work in Canada. And to be eligible to work in Canada, you'd need a social insurance number, and you would need a Canadian bank account. So you would have to pass a port of entry into Canada before you could have access to that employment income. Lastly, there's other scholarship information that you can find online, but I just note here that there are sources from internal donors as well as external scholarships that you could apply to. So, for example, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada provides funding to students as well as faculty. So in some cases, depending on who you're working with, you might also have additional funding from your individual supervisor for a specific project. So you would typically do the work that's outlined for that particular grant project rather than pursuing your own research. Okay, getting to admissions criteria. Typically, students applying to our program have a master's degree or some equivalent from an accredited university. And those are both MRP and thesis students. So we often get the question, if I only did a major research paper at the master's level, am I still eligible, or am I on equal footing to others who might have done a thesis? So I would first say, no, you haven't just done an MRP, you did an MRP, and you're equally qualified to come into the program, whether you have an MRP or a thesis. We don't discern those two. Now, if a particular supervisor had preferred that you had some experience writing a thesis in the past, then that that could be considered, but typically MRP students have experience in conducting research, so that's not typically been an issue. In fact, I would argue in some cases MRPs are coming into the program with a paper that's been published already from their research. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that piece. And if you look at other universities, no one ever stipulates that you're at some disadvantage if you did an MRP versus a thesis. So that same applies here at Brock. We ask that you have a minimum of 80% in applying to our program. It's quite competitive, and that's over the last 2 years of study. That would be for your master's. Yeah, that's a typo there for undergraduate. It's at the master's level, you would have a minimum average of 80%. You would have either successfully completed SAS 501 or 502, or it may be required that you take that course as part of your admission to the program. We do have proficiency requirements. And lastly, you would need agreement in principle from a core faculty member that they are agreeing to supervise your work should you be offered admission to the program. I know the deadline for the program is January 13th. So the great news is there's still quite a bit of time to apply. So to go through that checklist, one, of course, you're going to go and make sure that you have those minimum criteria. Then secondly, you're going to want to include several items we've listed here. And I just want to go over a few of those items with you. First is the CV. The CV is a great place for you to tell us a little bit more about your experiences to date. So your academic background, for example, should be on there, but also any research opportunities you've had, maybe to present at a conference, or you created a poster for a conference, or you co-wrote a journal article, for example. Those would be really important items to include there, as well as any scholarships or awards that you've received, and a brief description of those. In some cases, you're coming from different locations where we may not have an appreciation for what that award is about. So maybe a sentence or two on whether that award was given to students in the top percent of their, 5% of their graduating class, or it was because you demonstrated some leadership qualities, for example, in your cohort of students graduating from a particular program. Then those bits of information are really helpful to the admissions committee. Your written statement of intent should include some details around what your research interests are, who you've identified as your supervisor and principal. It might be even two people that you've identified, but telling us a little bit more about how there's some synergies between or how your research is aligned with that faculty member, and what your ideal kind of project might look like for your PhD. The name of one core faculty member has to be listed on your application, and I just remind you that you want to make sure you go through our list and see who's available to supervise your work before selecting somebody. So note that availability. You want to use 3 academic references, and if 3 aren't available, then you can use a professional reference. It's ideal if they have some sense of your research capabilities and can speak to those. The letter that they write does ask them specific questions that get at your academic abilities, your research potential, for example. So if you can, try to include 3 academic references, but 2 academic references and 1 professional reference would be okay too. In some cases, students may have completed their master's degree and then been working for several years. So we do understand that there are different circumstances that you're coming to our program from. So making us aware of those is a really great idea. Lastly, you're including the usual pieces of information for your application, like transcripts and proof of English proficiency if that's required. And then you're submitting the application and application fee. Lastly, I just want to highlight some of the career paths and sample research areas for students in the PhD program, and I have to warn you, they run the full gamut from not-for-profit organizations to government organizations. There are a lot of third sector organizations now that are offering employment. I was recently digging through some interesting sites for jobs like Indeed and found some interesting positions available now here locally, actually. A lot of co-op positions as well, which is kind of interesting. But there are positions where PhD students are being hired beyond just the academy, right? Although that's one career path that you can choose. I particularly like that path. That's the path I chose, but it's not necessarily for everyone, right? So there's a lot of research going on, for example, in government, which a lot of students may not realize, where PhDs are at every level of government, they're being hired. As well as at research centers, right? So some research areas, again, these are very broad. They cover most of the work that, of course, sustainability science is part of it, and that includes topics like climate change, natural resource management, think of wetland ecosystems, for example, forested ecosystems, forest and urban landscapes, water and natural resource management, monitoring and evaluation. So there's a lot of work that we've done in the center too around environmental stewardship and evaluating the outcomes of environmental stewardship initiatives and whether we've been successful or not, right? So there's lots of different opportunities. You can read about faculty, staff, and students currently in the program, but also alumni from our master's program. You can't read a lot about alumni from our PhD program because it's a new program as of last year. But you can at least read about the current PhD students there as well. All right, so that's it for the presentation portion. We want to welcome questions from the audience, but we also include a slide here with, again, more information around how to reach out to us at sci@brocu.ca, so ssci@brocu.ca. And then, of course, you can see that we have a social media presence as well, and that might have been how you learned about us. So I'll wrap up there and take questions that you have online. Thank you.
So we don't have any from online as of yet, but Lauren has a few that came in with RSVPs, so we can
excellent.
Pose a few of those to you to start.
That sounds great.
Great. So we have a person from Ottawa wondering if there's any flexibility in course delivery modes and any opportunity to study online, or do you need to be in person?
That's a great question. Now that we are not emerging out of the pandemic, but we're emerging out of restrictions here in Ontario, we are holding classes in person. And so that's the primary format that we're using. We are still at times hosting events and some classes online, but it would be maybe a class or two for a class that's otherwise in person. So the answer would be it's no, it's not exclusively online, and that you would want to come here to attend classes, yeah.
I think if it's okay if I just add something to that, Marilyn, and just to take full advantage of the opportunity that the program does offer in the region that we live in, being in person is very beneficial to the students to be here.
I would wholeheartedly agree, and because we are often out, right, studying the local environment, working with local partners, for example, the town of Lincoln is one example. Another example would be Niagara Parks Commission. World Wildlife Fund. We have actually several partnerships now. There's, last time I checked, I think there were about 7 or 8 roughly, that, because then that also allows you to, engage with partners in person now as well. And go and actually be embedded in the landscape that you're studying is really critical. But I can totally appreciate why someone would want to also be online, because it's one of the only one in Canada that offers this.
So Marilyn, I think that question was probably from Paul. He's joining us from Ottawa, and he was asking about the online piece, but he also asked about part-time, which I think this program might not work for him anymore, but could you speak to the part-time piece? Yeah.
Thank you, Paul. And I hope things are going well in Ottawa. I'm from Ottawa, actually, grew up there. I love Ottawa. We don't say no, we don't offer part-time opportunities. It gets a little bit tricky, Paul, when in the first term is when often those classes, those core classes you need to take, kind of give you the fundamental basics, are offered in that term and not necessarily in other terms. So to take it, you either have to take them in first term or wait that full year. And that full year, you're already now into your comprehensive exam and preparing your proposal for research. So ideally, what one option could be is that maybe you start out first term full-time, but then you transition to part-time, right? And that might be a way to kind of work through that bit. So it requires a little bit of kind of flexibility on both the program side and the student side, but there are ways we have managed to make that work for our master's students, for example, that's gone fairly smoothly.
Paul also asked about our master's level program, if the same learning methods also applied, and I said yes, just so you know.
Yes. Thank you, Paul.
Any other questions online?
No, go ahead.
So there was another question submitted online asking for some more clarification around scholarship opportunities. So I know you talked about scholarships a little bit. Maybe did you want to explain kind of how the internal donor awards work? I'm also happy to explain it if you would like.
Why don't I click on the slide or this link, and I'll let you, since since you represent Faculty of Grad Studies, and then I can add to that if you like. Okay. Let me just, hi everyone's full screen. Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Okay.
So this page that Marilyn has brought up here shows the different funding options that are available to grad students. And I'm just going to scroll a little bit here and help you get to the part that talks about internal awards. So every grad student that is admitted into the program on a full-time basis will receive a funding package. So those are those numbers that Marilyn talked about earlier. But in addition to that, there's other funding opportunities that are available to you. I know Marilyn touched on external awards, so things like the tri-agency awards. Now for PhD students, we've missed the deadline to apply for those. They were October 15th, but those are definitely the way to get yourself the most extra money towards the program. So these awards can vary in value, but they go from $15,000 a year up to $50,000 a year. So if you were successful in gaining entry to the program, you could look at those for next year on how to apply. We have lots of info sessions and supports in the Faculty of Graduate Studies to help you apply for those awards, tips to really make your application stand out. But then the other part, I think you need to be on a different page here. So you're on our Faculty of Graduate Studies website and you hover over awards and scholarships and you go to this internal scholarships and awards. This will pull up a gigantic list of everything that is available to you. There are some sustainability specific awards, but the way you're going to find the most is if you just filter by faculty and you go all faculties. This will show you what everybody is eligible for. And most of these are done on academic merit or things like leadership capabilities. And you apply for all of these awards at one time when you apply to the program. So you fill out one application, you'll be asked to answer some kind of qualifying criteria, and it will populate for you which awards you are eligible for, and then it'll ask you to fill out the criteria. So I really recommend that everybody pay attention to the criteria and the questions that it asks you and answer them as authentically as you can, because we get a lot of students who put together 2, 3, 4 line sentence. So it's not hard, again, to make your application stand out if you really put some thought and effort into answering those questions about, your leadership experiences, things along those lines. So that's definitely a way to help add some money to your funding package. The majority of these we would be able to put on your offer of admission, so you'll know when you are granted entry to the program, if there's any other awards that you will be receiving. And then the one other thing to talk about, which you might have touched on this, Marilyn, and forgive me if I'm overlapping, but research fellowship from your supervisor.
Yeah.
So a lot of students, we get this question all the time. How do I ask my supervisor about fellowship? Please don't be shy to ask about that. I think any prof would agree that, this is part of the deal and it's something that they expect to hear from students. So when you're communicating with potential supervisors, don't be shy about asking if potential supports are there and are available to you. I hope that covered it for everybody. But if not, you can always email us with more questions and we can try and answer them for you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Sure.
And again, often when we do make offers of admission, those funds that a faculty member has available to them, say for a particular project that they have funding for, then you would be being made aware of that. But again, remember that funding would then go to you working on a specific project with already a clear objective and goals in mind, right, for that project. So your supervisor would likely be asking you to do a series of tasks to help satisfy a portion of their funding for the grant that they received. And then, of course, they report on that through publications, for example. They disseminate that information. So.
And there is one more question that came from online. I'm not sure if this will mean more to you than it means to me. I'm not exactly sure what this person was asking, but they were wondering about having a minor in environmental sustainability and how does that change things. I'm guessing maybe their undergraduate degree wasn't fully focused on sustainability and they just did it as a minor. Would they still be eligible for probably the master's?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a master's degree for the eligibility criteria. It's a master's degree or equivalent. So are they able to tell us what master's degree they have by chance?
It doesn't tell me here. It just said that they have completed a university bachelor's degree. I'm thinking this was probably more geared towards the master's level session.
Yeah, it could be that they maybe missed that session, but were able to join this one.
Yeah.
For the master's program, we do take applications from many different academic backgrounds, and the minor in environmental sustainability is just fantastic addition bonus to, so that we wouldn't necessarily, not choose someone without the minor, but the minor would definitely be helpful to them in studying in our grad program. But it wouldn't necessarily mean that they're closer to being brought into the program or admitted into the program, if that helps. Yeah.
I don't have any other questions from online. I don't know if Lauren does.
That's everything from me as well.
All right, well, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their busy day to come and hear a bit more about our program. We really appreciate your time. And again, if you do have additional questions, then just send them directly to ssci@brocku.ca. All right, thank you very much. Have a great day.